Alright, what I'm going to try to do here is a live stream. So this is sort of real time, or it is real time. I'm going to take these carbon bell cranks. I'm going to put some wax on them. Carbon bell crank molds, I should say. So I won't lay up all of them that I'm doing here. I got 6 molds I'm going to wax. So this is the way I prep them. I've already done a little bit before I turn the camera on. I wax the posts. And I'll explain a little bit as I go. Now this wax I'm using, it's called Mold Release #1 out of AdTech. And I don't even think they make it anymore. AdTech, I don't even know if it's in business. And I think Mold Release 1 from AdTech is might have been a SEBA product or something they repackaged. So it's a low viscosity wax. It wipes on really nice. It's not, I say it's not imperative to use that. I mean, it just makes it easier. So what I do on these molds, I wax the mold. And this is pretty much the process, the sequence of events I go through. Get a better shot of what's going on the bench here. So these pins that I'm putting in now, these are drill rod. They're not music wire. They're 1/8 inch pins. And what I'm doing is I put those pins to where they're just barely sticking out of the mold there. Maybe like 1/64. You see a little bit better there. And what I'm going to try to do here today is lay up 6 of these. The way that I found to make these things efficiently anyway is make them in batches, at least 6, or sometimes if I was really ambitious I do a dozen at a time. So each one of these molds have been waxed. I used to experiment without wax. I just used to use a release agent, like a oh, I don't know. It was, this is a new mold. Let me show you something on that in a minute. The PVA basically forms a physical barrier between the resin and the mold. That way your molds don't degrade over time. Okay, this is a new mold. I don't think it's ever been used yet. So what I need to do with this mold is actually relieve the holes at the bottom. Let's see. So when I made this mold, basically I molded it around a drill rod pin. So it's a really tight fit all the way from the bottom of the mold to the top. And that's all right, but it just makes your job harder. So what I want to do on this one is drill out the bottom of this mold. So I'll do that later off camera. We'll set this aside. So really, you still want the tight fit up here at the top, right there, but you don't want the tight fit all the way down to the bottom. So what I do is I countersink this hole and drill it out to about right in here. Enlarge this hole. Not all the way through to the face of the mold, but probably about an 1/8 inch or a 1/4 inch from the top of this mold. I'll enlarge it so that way the pin fits in loose until it reaches the last part of this mold. So you still have the sealing tightness at this part. It makes it easier to insert the pin. Okay, at this point, let's put some PVA in here. This is just an old Thayer Chandler Chicago brush. I gave it a cleaning. Let's see if it's clean enough to work. Compressor might come on here for a minute. So at this point, it's been waxed. I got the pins in there. Now I'm going to spray some of this PVA in there. What I like to do is spray it relatively a wet coat. Now, it doesn't matter if it's shiny or not. So what we'll do is we'll go back later and spray a matte finish on it. Bigger gun, it'd be faster in yards. But I like the gun because I can get down in the cracks. Hi, John. Yeah, John, I see you're on here. Talking to Sparky today. We both decided we can use some bell cranks. So if you need one, let me know. The other thing with this stream here, I got a new internet service. I'm sort of wondering how it's going to work out. Especially on a stream. Now you notice this main hole right here plugged up with that. I'll do that after the PVA goes on. Bad thing about a live stream is you can't edit the noisy compressor out. It is what it is, I guess. So I'm putting this PVA on pretty thick, and it's glossy in some spots and flat in others, which that's alright. So what I try to do towards the end here, I actually choked the gun down and spattered in there. So the last coat of PVA, I try to keep the pressure up and the material down and spatter it. And that's how I get the flat finish on these parts that I make. And that really doesn't have any effect on the part, it's just cosmetic, just the look. So this one's starting to flatten out pretty good. See if we can get a view of that. The other thing I think happens when you spatter it in there like that, all the extra air sort of dries up the PVA that's already in there. It's really hard to see what you're doing with the PVA sometimes. You got to hold it into the light. So this is all pretty old school here. This is what the exact same thing I was doing probably in the 90s. So fast forward, if you wanted to speed this process up, if I had to do it over again, and it's a catch-22 because sometimes you can spend too much money and not be able to recoup it on this stuff, is actually get these things CNC milled out of the block of stainless or something. See, these are molded. But anyway, you get these things CNC'd out of a block of good stainless or maybe aluminum, but that way you could heat this up, lay the toe in there, put the plate on it, and forget about the PVA because the metal, especially stainless, would hold up to the corrosive epoxy, and you just have a finish that you have in the mold. So there's a lot of ways to improve upon it, and maybe one of these days I'll do that. One of the design features of this bell crank that could be improved is the lead out attachment to where it goes onto a button. Instead of through the bell crank, it goes into the fork at the end and pivots on a post. I've got a prototype made up of that bell crank. I just haven't done anything with it yet. Prototype to actually make a mold. So I think before I'd have anything machined out of stainless, I'd probably try to proof the concept with this stuff here first to see how it worked out. Steve Berry says, good afternoon. Nice to see someone besides Sparky doing control line stuff. So as I'm spraying this PVA, I'm thinking this is probably about as boring as him sanding. So, but anyway, you get an idea. And it was sort of, today was a good day to fiddle around and try this streaming deal on this new wireless connection. So it's sort of thrown together. I guess something thrown together is probably better than nothing. So once I get this PVA in here, I get a good flat finish. What I do is take a hair dryer or a monocoat gun and dry it, if it wasn't already dry. The next step was to put in a gel coat, and I'll probably get to that point, and then we'll talk about something else, because the gel coat's got to actually cure. The gel coat is the same resin as the part being made. The resin in these bell cranks, what I was using was an Epon 815. They call it an 815C now. And then with the 815, which was a very low viscosity resin, I take the Resin Services, this HT386. This is mixed 33% per hundredweight. So once you take a really thin resin, like the 815, and then you add 33% curing agent to it, you get a super thin resin. And what that allowed me to do is get a really good compaction in this mold with carbon. So when you start laying this bell crank up, you mix up just enough resin in a cup to do one bell crank at a time. And what happens, you start out with the resin super thin, and by the time you close the mold up, it's usually 20 minutes later. So each one of these bell cranks, just to lay the carbon in the mold, was 20 minutes. That's not including the PVA, demolding it, and all the other stuff. But in 20 minutes time, at a shop temperature about 75-80 degrees, the resin started to thicken up. So when the resin starts to thicken up, the carbon wants to stay down in the mold. It stays tighter because it starts to get stickier. And then you slap the lid on it, clamp it closed, and then you're done with it. So these are almost done. I got 5 of them. When I was doing a lot of composite work, I'd have a separate bench. All my composite stuff was over there on another bench, which I got rid of. So John says the picture and sound's good. That's encouraging. I think a good edited video is the way to go if you have time, but I think it's nice just to stream it. The other thing you can do that will change the finish on this PVA is how far you hold the gun away. So if you get close, it's wet. If you come out and you let the fan open up, you can get a matte finish. So it's really contingent on pressure, the mix. It's a lot of things. Temperature. It's just a matter of playing around with it. One of the things John Jordan, he's probably watching, I think, but he was talking about, he was going to make tanks, composite tanks. One of the problems he had is getting the actual mandrel to release from the resin. I'd like to be able to go over that with him and try a couple different things to where you'd wrap the mandrel with some kind of plastic that would actually allow it to release, some kind of film. So hopefully he hadn't completely given up on that tank deal. Okay, let me step out of the frame real quick. I'm going to show you the next step here. I'll do the rest off camera, and then I'll turn it back on when I actually lay the parts up. So let's see here. I'll go over here and get a bell crank that's actually got the what I want to call it, the gel coat in it. Let's see here. This is what I'm going to try to get to. I could probably lay this one up, matter of fact. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. Alright, let's see. Alright, well, I'll tell you what, since this thing looks good enough, normally I like this to sort of go into a B stage. This is cured for probably a year, so I don't know if you get the proper adhesion or not to the gel coat, but it's not structural anyway. So what we could do is lay this thing up. So what I've got here, I've got some milled carbon, and I got chopped carbon, which is probably chopped in 1/8 inch pieces. And let me get some gloves on, and I'll zoom the camera out and then we'll lay this thing up. Let's see, get some carbon in here. Now, if my memory serves me correct, I think it's probably about 3 foot of carbon that go into this bell crank. We'll cut it extra just in case. Steve Berry asked, am I going to be making horns? I spoke with another Pampa member. He's talking about making horns. And I told him, I said, if you decide to make the horns, I'll tell you exactly how to do it, or how I did it. And then if you start making them, and you can actually make them, I won't bother you. And what I meant by that is, the hobby's only so big. And if somebody puts the money out for a control horn to have them laser cut, and you have 3 or 4 people or even 2 people doing the same thing, it makes it probably not worthwhile to the people that are doing it. The thing is, with this control line stuff, if you have too many people climbing over your back doing the same thing, and you've got thousands of dollars invested into laser cut stuff, well, it doesn't take too long to figure out that a bunch of people are going to be sitting on a bunch of stuff. Okay, well, I think I got enough of this. So what I got to do next is mix up some resin. So this cup is 2 grams. So what I want to do is set this at 12 grams. So I want to put 10 grams of resin in this cup. I've already compensated for the 2 grams. So let's see if I can get this pretty close. I guess the answer to the horn thing is, if the person I spoke with on the phone doesn't actually want to make any of this stuff and nobody else does, I'd probably go ahead and make them. I just don't want to step on somebody else's foot. Okay, so I got 12 grams. So I've got 10 grams of resin, 2 for the cup, total of 12. So since this is 33% per hundredweight, I need 3.33 grams of this hardener. So I need to set the scale at 15.33, and that will compensate for the cup. So I can go 15.4 as long as you're fairly close. Now, one of the things I do, if I start pouring this in there and I over pour it, what I'll actually do is, since it isn't mixed, I can pour it off the top. Alright, it takes Been a while since I've been into this one. Normally I keep this curing agent in little squirt bottles, so I'm not pouring out of the jug. So I'll go to the craft store and I buy these little whatever you call them. This is called a glue bellows. Got the little needle tips. Okay, that snaps in there like that. I haven't used these before. What I normally use, I'll put the hardener in these little squeeze bottles. I just don't have any 386 already in a squeeze bottle. So the whole deal is here, I guess it's the process that really matters. I mean, I'm using this curing agent and this resin. I've had people ask me, well, why do you use that? I said, well, after playing around with it for many years, it's what I found works for me. But that doesn't mean it's the only thing out there that'll work. So if you could come up with something with the same properties, the cure times, the viscosity and all that, you know, there's no reason why you couldn't use that. Let's see how this works. Now I've tried pouring out of this jug on small parts. It's a disaster. Ends up running all over the scale. So this resin's bad enough. The curing agent's even worse. You don't want to get this on your skin or in your eyes. All right. The other thing you got to make sure of when you get resin and you get curing agent, don't wipe the resin bottle off with something you got curing agent on. It'll contaminate it. Let's see if I got 3.3 grams in this little eyedropper. Now you probably can't see it from the camera, but what I'm doing is I'm adding this curing agent slowly until my scale comes up to 0. Then you just take your trusty old stir. All right, the other thing you can do, once you get this resin in here, you can actually stir it with the acid brush too. John's asking about that forked end bell crank. I said, no, this isn't it right here, but I have the prototype made up. I just haven't made the mold. I am going to try that. Whether it works or not, I'm going to go through with it and make a mold from it. One of the things that's not on camera is this thing here. This is added after the PVA. So if I was getting ready to put the what do I want to say, the gel coat in here, this would go in like that. And these little bushings here, these are all light bushings. So the process, the next step would be on this to insert this is drill rod, and it's bushed out, and it's bushed out bigger here. But as it comes through there, it's still a little loose, but this oil light bushing goes over the 1/8 inch rod, and it's pushed down in the mold like that. So that's how I get it inset in there. And then from this step right here, you'd brush the gel coat in. So once that gel coat went in, now you're back to this stage here. So basically, by stirring this up with an acid brush, it gets down in the corners of this cup. That way you don't have any parts of this resin cup that aren't mixed. So the milled carbon, this stuff is sort of dangerous, it's so fine. And then the chopped carbon. Those, between the carbon toe, the chop, and the mill, basically that's it. As far as the filler material, it's all carbon. Okay, so you got the gel coat in, you got everything set up, you got your resin mixed, and you got your toe. So what I like to do is brush this resin in the mold. Now don't worry about getting too much resin in here. You can always sop it up with paper towel. The good thing about this part, it's small and easy to control. You know, as far as manipulating the carbon in it. The bad part is it's small. So on this button right here that goes out of the bell crank, I'll take chopped toe. And if you don't buy the chopped stuff, it's no big deal. You can just take the toe you got and start snipping off little pieces on the end. And what I try to do is pack this back down in there really tight and fill that button up. So I've got videos of this bell crank being laid up with a time lapse. And it's nothing new. And it's something most people don't watch. It's boring. But we needed a couple carbon bell cranks here for some projects. I needed some. Sparky wanted one. I'll give one to John. So I thought this would be a good time to turn on the stream, see if it works. So anyway, I got the carbon in there, and let me zoom in a little bit. That way you can see a little bit better what I'm doing. Now I got a time lapse between this camera and what I'm looking at on the phone, so sometimes I'm not sure if it's where it needs to be. Okay, at this point, I take the carbon and I split it. Doesn't have to be perfect. I start out here in the middle. And I go on each side of this post, on both sides of that and this one. And I'll lay that carbon in there. And I'll work it down in this mold. And you'll notice as you're going along, it'll want to spring out, so it's not really a factor. So just keep smashing it down in there. And I try to over wet it with resin at this point. Because I can always pull it out. Now at this point on the first lap, memory serves me correct, I do a 360 around this pin, on each pin. And let's say you're not into making bell cranks. I don't know what I'm doing here. It might be advantageous to make some other part. So as you can see, you just keep working the resin out of it. Now one of the things you'll notice that the resin I'm putting on the carbon here is clear. This gel coat is black. It's the same resin. Now the difference is it has pigment added to it. I think it was fiberglass, fiber GLAST. It's out of Ohio, or there's other places too that sell pigments for epoxy resins, and they got them in, I don't know, blue, yellow, green, black. And I bought a little half pint of this black, and we're only talking just a little dab on the end of a screwdriver to do something like that. It doesn't take hardly any at all. So if you buy pigment for your resin, a little go a long way. Now the other thing here with this black pigment and the gel coat, it all has to do with cosmetics. That gel coat adds actually nothing to the strength of the bell crank. And you could probably argue that maybe more toe and less gel coat would make it even stronger, but you know, I've never had any problem with the strength. So as you can see, if this gel coat's cured up pretty good, which this is, you can go in there pretty aggressive and start working this toe down in this mold. And if you're not sure if it's wet or not, you can pull it out of the mold here and you can wet it out like that. And if you're really into the speed up the production, what you do, instead of wetting this carbon out in the mold like I'm doing, you would actually wet the toe before you ever put it in the mold. So this next lap around, you'll notice I'm not doing the 360. Basically, I'm coming around the outside of this post, and I vary it. So I'm adding more resin, squeegeeing it out. Steve Bray said, am I going to be mass producing these things? I'll tell you what, Steve, the way it's going, I mean, when I quit making these bell cranks, I had job changes and kids that were in sports and all kinds of stuff going on. I quit the hobby part of it, is making stuff. I was at the point, Steve, where I got to where everything was going along okay, but I thought I could make it faster. In other words, I was at the point where I had to figure out how to speed it up. And I guess it's a normal process. You start out and then you always try to figure out ways to make it more productive. So in the next year, probably what I'll do here, I'll go through here and I'll take a look at some of this stuff I was doing, and I'll see if I can speed it up any. And before I had a lot of commitments coming up, I was working on that forked end bell crank. And the idea is do a prototype, cast a mold like this out of hand. And then once everything looked like it was going to work out okay, go to a machine shop and have them machine some of the molds. So one of the things in composites to speed up the process is a higher temp resin, or introduce heat into the process. So by introducing heat into this process, you cut down the cycle times on the mold. So instead of, when I was making these bell cranks, I'd make them just like this, 20 minutes per layup. Now this one might be longer than that, but since I'm fiddling around here talking and I'm not really trying to go fast, 20 minutes. But if it was a higher temp process, instead of doing it 20 minutes, putting it in here, putting it in the oven, letting it sit in there for a day, letting it cook at like 120, 150, and then taking them out the next day. Basically, you could cycle it every couple hours. So if you had the process where you're doing these bell cranks, you'd lay it up, you pre-wet the carbon, you lay it in the mold, close the mold, ramp it up to about 250. Once you got the 250, you let it go for an hour or two, ramp it down. So each day, you know, you could cycle the molds maybe 2 or 3 times. So I don't know, I'm playing around with it. Up until this point, I didn't have any time. I had a lot of stuff going on. And like I said earlier, I doubt anybody'd mess with these things. They take too long to do. Too much problem. But the gentleman that was talking about making horns, I said, man, if you make them, that'd be great. And it comes down to the fact, well, somebody's got to do this stuff. I mean, for the people to sustain the hobby. Not everybody's gonna want to make everything, so you need a lifeline of some supplies and stuff. And I know the balsa wood's been an issue. There's been a lot of issues. So at this point, as you can see, it's starting to come out. You know, there's voids in here, and that's okay. So at this point, I can take this milled carbon and I can dump some around there in each one of these points and sort of use this as like a little bit of a filler material. So that helped a little bit. Now, next step, once you get it to this point, take the old paper towel and you're going to try to squeeze out as much of that resin as you can. You can see when you squeeze, you can see that resin come up through the carbon. You can see it bubble up, and once you get the resin to bubble up, you blot it away. It does two things: it gets more carbon in there and less resin, and also it allows the carbon to pack and stick down in the mold. Now this chop carbon, not the milled but the chop, is probably 3/16 or an 1/8 inch length. Even though it's not a continuous fiber, it still adds strength in a void. And the ideal way would be to actually make this mold to where you take a couple revolutions of this toe and then that fills it perfectly, so you have no filler material. But like I said, this was back in the 90s, back in the Stone Age when I was doing these. Yeah, Steve Berry mass producing these, if so the price. And then he says simple economics, there needs to be a demand and justify the supply. And I think there's a demand. You just have to lower your supply to meet the demand. The other thing with this control line aerobatic stuff, you sort of get a synergy going. So it's what comes first, the chicken or the egg. So it's like people say, well, we'd be more involved in this, the hobby or the sport would be better off if you had more accessibility to good stuff. So I think there's a lot of truth into that. And it goes all the way to flying sites, hobby shops, people that supply the products, whether it be hobby related or Wix or whatever. Even people that aren't into the hobby that still supply stuff we need. And that allows the hobby to grow. So just by putting the stuff out there and making it accessible, it actually increases the participation level. Now, if you stop and think about it, if you had a hobby shop on every corner where there's a liquor store, and it was full of 46-pound balsa and glue, plans, and they were stocked up, they'd and there's accessible flying fields, you'd probably say, well, we'd be better off because more people would do it. But I don't know. You have to be optimistic that eventually it comes back in some form. Another thing, on YouTube, you look at all these younger people, when I say younger, I mean 30s, these woodworkers. And there's a bunch of them out there now. And they've got pretty good